Hello, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Welcome to our presentation. My name is Joanna Frankowska. I'm a project manager for machinery in CEN and CENELEC, and I'm here together with my colleague Constant Koller, who is the account manager for electrotechnology in CENELEC. The topic of our presentation is drafting standards for citation in the OJEU. It consists of 4 parts. So first, I will talk about the standardization requests. Then in the second part, I will give you the update on the Haas assessment system, including how to resolve lack of compliance assessment, especially at the formal vote stage. And then Constant will cover the elaboration of harmonized standard. And finally, item 4, the citation of harmonized standards in the official journal of the European Union. And there will be a dedicated part for questions and answers. So let's start with the first part on the standardization requests. As you may know, a standardization request is a necessary link between the legislation of the European Union and a harmonized standard which supports the requirements of this European Union legislation. The standardization request is formally the Commission implementing decision. It is issued on the basis of the regulation on standardization 1025. This slide shows in general the process the process starting from the first announcement of the future possible standardization request. This is done in the Commission document called the Annual Union Work Program for European Standardization, and I will talk a bit more about this document very soon. Then the European Commission issues a standardization request to the European standardization organizations, here CEN and CENELEC. If this standardization request is accepted, then a harmonized standard can be developed, and during its development, it is assessed by Haas consultants. Once such a harmonized standard is finalized, then it is offered by CEN or by CENELEC to the official journal of the European Union for citation. So here the important information is that the standardization request is a precondition for citation of harmonized standards in the official journal of the European Union. So I have mentioned the annual Union work programs for European standardization. These are documents that the European Commission publishes each year. And in these documents, the European Commission lays down its intention to issue the future possible standardization requests. So then in this document, the European Commission identifies strategic priorities for the standardization. And this is very often the first reference about the future standardization requests. These documents are publicly available on the Commission website. For the document, which will be for the next year, 2022. For the time being, we have access to the preliminary draft of such an annual union work program. It is already publicly available, and we still wait for the real correct annual union work program that is expected to be published soon, next year. Now, I would like to talk about the consultation of on the draft standardization request before it is adopted. So such a consultation is carried out among the stakeholders, so including, of course, CEN and CENELEC, and also among the member states of the European Union. As regards the consultation in CEN and CENELEC, we have a special process in place as approved by CEN and CENELEC technical boards, so the highest decisive bodies for technical matters. In line with this process, CEN and CENELEC set up a dedicated group, which is called Standardization Requests Ad Hoc Group, and its acronym is SRAG. It consists of the representatives of CEN BT members or CENELEC permanent delegates that are also the members of the BT in CENELEC. It consists of the experts that are nominated by those. It consists of the impacted partner organizations, for example, ANEC or SBS. Of course, it also consists of the representatives of the impacted technical bodies, sector forum or coordination group, if relevant, and if relevant, of the ISO or IEC representatives, if the future work is going to be carried out in parallel with these organizations. If needed to get some clarifications from the European Commission, then the European Commission representative is also invited to participate in this group, and the secretariat of this group is held by CCMC. The important aim of this group is to ensure that the consultation in CEN and CENELEC is carried out timely, and that the input is gathered from all the relevant stakeholders. Then another important task of this group is to advise the technical boards. It's on the basis of the input from this group that the CEN and or the CENELEC technical boards will take the decision whether to accept or reject the standardization request. As regards the consultation, if a given standardization request is relevant for your technical TC, then your engagement is very important. It's important, if you are a TC secretary, it's important that you coordinate the input from the TC, so that the TC voice is taken into account on whether the standardization request is feasible in terms of its content, in terms of the target dates. So your role is very important. A few more specificities regarding the standardization requests, how it is approved. It is voted upon by the body, which is Committee on Standards. It is chaired by the European Commission. It is the body set up on the basis of the standardization regulation, a horizontal Commission committee in charge of the matters relevant for the European standardization. CEN and CENELEC has a permanent observership there, but the document is voted upon by the member states. Then, if it is approved by this Committee on Standard, it is submitted to CEN and, or if relevant, to CENELEC for the final decision whether we will accept or reject the standardization request. And according to the standardization regulation, more precisely in line with Article 10, which is relevant here, CEN or CENELEC have 1 month to give this final decision. This is why we start the consultation, and also we start the vote on the standardization request earlier in advance to be on time and in line with this target date. Usually we start such a vote at the moment where the standardization request is submitted to a vote in the Committee on Standards. Another specificity of the standardization request is that they have now an expiry date. As I have already mentioned, formally, it is standardization request is a prerequisite in order to have a standard cited. So in other words, if there's no dedicated standardization request, it's not possible to have the standard cited. Another important point is that in principle, standardization requests can be revised, but attention, this requires going through the whole formal process as it is valid for a new standardization request. So it's not something that can be done very quickly. It takes some time because it requires fulfilling the procedures that I have mentioned before. And then, for your information, all the standardization requests are available on the Commission website, and here you have the link to the European Commission database with these standardization requests. With these last 2 slides, I would like to give you some information about the content of the standardization requests. So they consist of the main body, which are the articles, because as I have mentioned, this is formally a Commission decision. And this part is quite typical. This is the formal request from the European Commission to the European standardization organizations. There's the information about the deadlines, some deadlines, for example, to issue the annual reports. And there is the information on the expiry date. This part is not very long in practice, but then there are also the annexes that contain specific information regarding the requirements on harmonized standards that are requested to be developed. So first, there is the annex with the list of the standards that either need to be revised or the list of brand new standards that the Commission requests CEN or CENELEC to deliver. And so you have it in the second column, let us say so. And then in the last column, you have the target date for the adoption of a given specific harmonized standard. And this is the date of the availability of a standard, so DAV. So it's important to check this information when the document is still in draft, and if it concerns your TC, it's important to check whether the target dates that are proposed by the Commission are realistic for the TC to fulfill, to deliver. Because if the standardization request is accepted, it becomes a contractual obligation. This deadline is in practice a contractual obligation of CEN and CENELEC towards the European Commission. Then, apart from this list, we have also other annexes in the standardization request that give the general or specific requirements regarding harmonized standards under this specific legislation. And it's very important also to check these requirements when a draft standardization request is under consultation, because these requirements will be, of course, valid and applicable for harmonized standards if the standardization request is accepted. So it will be checked by the consultants and by the Commission whether these requirements are met. And with this slide, I would like to conclude on the part on the standardization request. Just 1 second, please. And now I would like to move to the second part, which is the update on the Haas assessment system, including the resolution of lack of compliance assessment, especially at formal vote stage. So first, let me say a few words about the Haas Contractor. Currently, it is the company Ernst & Young. It's the European Commission contractor, which means that this company was selected as a result of a tender that was announced by the European Commission. So Ernst & Young was given a contract, and this contract started on the 1st of April 2018, and normally, initially, is foreseen to finish on the 31st of March 2022. However, given the current situation linked with the limitations of the budget of Haas consultants, we were informed by the European Commission that the European Commission would like to start the next framework, the next contract, a bit earlier than foreseen. Normally, it is foreseen to start on the 1st of April 2022, but the European Commission would like to start it earlier so that the exchanges between the TCs and the consultants are again possible. And of course, we will keep you informed regarding this aspect. The important task of the Haas contractor is to manage the Haas consultant. So it is Ernst & Young that decides which consultant will assess a given standard. However, of course, Haas consultants are allocated per specific sector according to their experience, and also they are allocated to specific disease, and normally this is followed by Ernst and Young. In terms of the outcome of the assessment, it can be either compliant or lack of compliance. Compliant means that harmonized standard can be cited, and lack of compliance that it doesn't meet the requirements of the EU legislation or of the standardization request and cannot be cited. At least it is the information for this for the draft at the respective stage. As far as the task of Haas consultants are concerned, there are two main tasks. Their task is to assess the compliance of the documents with the legislation of the European Union and with the standardization request. And this accounts for 80% of consultants' time, according to the contract. And also the second task is to have the exchanges with the technical bodies to give the advice to contribute to the compliance. So this will be the exchanges by emails, meetings, calls. However, as you know, unfortunately, at this moment, these exchanges have been temporarily suspended due to the budget limitations. When an assessment can be requested. So this can be done at 4 stages. First, an early assessment can be requested at the first working draft stage. This is an optional assessment, so it is not carried out by default. It has to be specifically requested by the TC. However, it is highly recommended to be used because it is expected to decrease the risk of having lack of compliance assessment at the later stage. And very soon I will explain how to request such an assessment. Then, secondly, the assessments are requested at inquiry and then at formal vote stage. And these are the mandatory assessments, which means they're always requested by default by CCMC, and no action from the TC is needed. And then the fourth stage is an exceptional assessment, which is called publication assessment. This one can be requested if there is a specific need, only after the formal vote, and for the specific cases, as I have mentioned. So the most often it will be to assess the Annex Z, informative Annex Z, about the relationship between the essential requirements from the EU legislation and the clauses of the standards. Why it is exceptional? Because, as you know, after the formal vote, technical changes are not allowed. Not normally, they are not allowed. So this is why it is most often used in order to assess the Annex ZA, because in CEN and CENELEC there is a process foreseen that allows to revise, if necessary, an informative Annex Z via the vote at the level of the technical board. Due to the budget limitations, at this moment, the European Commission is prioritizing the assessments at formal vote and at publication, because these are the most critical stages. We requested additional information from the European Commission on these aspects, and we wait the European Commission to clarify it. Another important point is that there can be only one assessment per stage. So imagine there is a lack of compliance formal vote. Once the TC revises the draft in the current contract, it's not possible to ask for the second assessment at formal vote. There can be only one assessment. In terms of the duration, normally Ernst & Young has 5 weeks to deliver the assessment report from the moment when tested, and this is in principle respected. Here you can see that these 2 assessments are now prioritized. Now I would like to tell you a bit more about the assessments at the respective stages, which documentation is required to be delivered by the TC in order to have an assessment at the respective stage, and how to request it. So starting with the assessment at the first working draft, which again is highly recommended to use because it expects to increase the chance of having a compliant assessment at later stages. And normally it gives an opportunity to have the exchanges with the consultants before inquiry, except that now, unfortunately, this is not possible until the new consultants framework will become operational. So then how to request it? For the homegrown for the standards that are developed in CEN, it is necessary to fill in a transmission notice. So the document that is normally accompanying the draft that is submitted on the submission interface in CEN, which is called e-trans. And here on the right side, you have the print screen of such a transmission notice. And at the bottom, in the red frame, you can see the section and the square that has to be checked, indicating that the TC wants to use the assessment at the first working draft. It is CCMC project manager that in practice submits the request to Ernst & Young, because these are not default assessments, but optional assessments. And an important element to include is, of course, an informative Annex Z on the relationship between the legislation and the clauses of the standard. It's very important to start working on the Annex ZA from the beginning of the development of a standard. So it would be good to include it, or at least the first indication of such an Annex Z. For the work that is carried out in parallel, in practice, TC secretary needs to submit to CCMC CD stage. I'm sorry, a CD text. Once the assessment is delivered after 5 weeks, then it is available on the dedicated live link folder with Haas assessments that is available for the TC secretaries, and it is the secretary task to pick this assessment report and deliver it to the TC with the request to reply to each consultant comment, if any. Now, let's talk about the assessments at inquiry stage. Here, again, you have the list of the documents that are necessary to be submitted to CCMC in order to have such an assessment at inquiry requested. So this is, again, informative Annex Z. Now it is for sure, without exceptions, necessary to include the annex. Without it, it's not possible to request the assessment. Here, attention for the work that is carried out together with ISO. There is no need to submit an informative Annex Z to CCMC because it is part of the ISO this draft. However, attention, it is the task of the CEN-TC secretary to ensure that the Annex Z is included in the ISO text. So it is provided to the secretary in ISO, the committee manager, because it's CEN and CEN-TC responsibility ownership to achieve compliance with the European Union legislation and to carry out the tasks linked with that. Then another document, it's a normative Annex ZA on normative references, but this is valid only for the parallel work with IEC. And something that is a bit new, resulting from the decision of the technical boards that was adopted this year. It is mandatory also to include the checklists for TCs on the development of harmonized standards that needs to be filled in. And this is mandatory for homegrown harmonized standards and recommended for the parallel work. The CCMC editor will request an assessment when the translation into German and French will be requested. Again, the assessment report will be available in the dedicated live link folder. Now, as regards the outcome, if it is compliant, then it's a very good news. It is then possible to skip formal vote, but of course only if the TC decides to not include any technical changes after inquiry, because otherwise it's not possible to skip a vote in line with our rules. If it's lack of compliance, the launch of the inquiry is not delayed, which is different to the lack of compliance assessment before formal vote. And normally, of course, once the exchanges will be again possible, it's very important to discuss the comments from the assessments together with the consultant. The list of documents that need to be submitted for the formal vote assessment is very similar. So again, informative Annex Z, normative Annex ZA for the parallel work with IEC, the checklist for harmonized standard. Here there is another additional obligation to also include the information on how the assessment at inquiry was resolved by the TC. In practice, in the assessment report, there is a commenting table, and there is a last column and named observations of the secretariat, and this column has to be filled in. So attention, for each assessment, at each stage, all the comments from the consultants have to be addressed. However, for this formal vote stage, it is necessary to include this document when the formal vote draft is submitted to CCMC. And similarly, as for inquiry, the assessment is requested when the translation into French and German is requested, and assessment report is available on live link. It is the TC secretary task to pick it up and deliver to the TC and ask to address all the comments. Now I would like to explain how to add some documents to the request for the assessment if the TC wishes so. For example, if the TC would like to add some explanation, clarification regarding a product or a harmonized standard, or the report from the meeting in which the assessment was addressed, resolved, or very exceptionally, detailed justification in case the TC decides to use undated normative reference. But this is, again, very, very exceptional, because by default, all the normative references in harmonized standards, which are linked with the presumption of conformity, needs to be dative and active. So these are very punctual cases. But if there is such a case, it is necessary to provide a detailed justification upfront, meaning in this request for the assessment. Otherwise, there will be for sure lack of compliance assessment. It is important that such a document is in the PDF format, because very often the assessments are requested via the automatic tool, and this format is required for the tool to pick up the document. How to submit the document? This differs depending which stage it is and whether it's CEN or CENELEC, whether it's parallel work or homegrown, because we have different procedures. But for your convenience, we gathered here on the slides a comprehensive overview how to do so, depending on the case. So for the parallel work with ISO first working draft, this has to be submitted via e-trans, and this is then very exceptional case where for parallel work with ISO, SNTC secretary submits the draft on e-trans. Otherwise, all the drafts are submitted only at ISO submission interface. As you know, for CENELEC, the work with IC, there is no e-trans. So then the draft for the first working draft assessment needs to be provided by email at CCMC project manager, because these are project managers that request these assessments that are optional. For CEN homegrown standards, first working draft, inquiry, or formal vote, such a document has to be submitted via e-trans in the package of all the documents that are normally submitted as usual. For CENELEC homegrown, it is a dysfunctional usual email address of the production team, so mail production, that you have here, at which normally the drafts are submitted for procedures in CENELEC. And then for parallel work with ISO, IEC at inquiry, at formal vote, these documents have to be submitted at CCMC project manager email and also mail consultant, whereas when it is assessment at publication, this has to be provided at the CCMC PM email address, because these are the PMs that request this assessment. And it has to be clearly stated in the name of the document that these documents needs to be included in the request for the assessment. And I believe I need to speed up a bit. So I will try to speed up in order to give my colleagues sufficient time. So now I would like to move to my last section on how to resolve a lack of compliance assessment at formal vote. So there are decisions of the CEN and CENELEC technical boards which foresee the deadline. The deadline for the suspension of the formal vote is 12 weeks maximum, but the technical body needs to provide us the information on the way forward earlier so that there's sufficient time to inform the BT within this 12 weeks deadline if necessary. So the deadline to receive the information from the technical body on the way forward is 7 weeks. What is new is that for the parallel work with ISO, since the beginning of this year, 2021, the assessments of the formal vote draft are also carried out before formal vote, so not anymore during the formal vote. And in case there's lack of compliance, the formal vote is suspended, as it is the case for the homegrown standards, and the same deadlines apply. Now, the process on how to resolve a lack of compliance assessment at formal vote. First, very important, it is necessary that each comment from the assessment report is addressed, and this has to be done by filling in this dedicated column of the table in the assessment report that I have mentioned. And secondly, it's important in case the TC decides to still have a harmonized standard and to rework the standard in order to resolve the comments from the consultant. So then it is necessary to provide the rework draft in the track changes version, so that it is visible for the consultant, for the European Commission, also for CCMC, for the translator that has already carried out one translation. What are the changes? Then secondly, TC assesses whether this is a simple assessment, whether the comments are quite obvious from the consultants, like it is necessary to date normative references, or there are some maybe obvious errors, or some other comments, not many of them, with which the TC agrees. Then it might be that there is no need to have any exchange or meeting with the consultant in order to resolve the assessment. However, very often, as you know, the comments are more complex, and there is a need to have an exchange. And it is a very good practice to have a meeting between the project leader and the Haas consultant, except that now, as I have mentioned, this is temporarily not possible. So once it will be possible, again, it's very important that before the meeting, the TC provides to the consultant this documentation that I have mentioned under the point 1. I'm sorry. Then once this is done, then usually there are rounds of exchanges between the TCs and the consultants. Then at a certain point, it is necessary that the TC leadership concludes whether the assessment is resolved or not. If it's the conclusion that it is resolved, then the TC secretary needs to provide this documentation that I have mentioned. So the TC replies to the consultant comment and the draft in track changes to the CCMC PM, and in case this is an ISO assessment, also to the ISO technical project manager and ISO committee manager. And my colleague Constant will tell you a bit more about the assessments relevant for the project developed together with IC. Then CCMC project manager registers in CEN database Haas assessment resolved and informs, if relevant, the ISO technical project manager as well as the ISO production team if this is the work carried out with ISO. For the projects developed with ISO, it is then necessary that ISO TC committee manager, so equivalent to the CEN/TC secretary, submits this documentation that was mentioned also on the ISO submission interface. This documentation is provided by CCMC to the European Commission at the moment when a harmonized standard is offered, so that the Commission can check how the TC resolved the assessment. So this is another important reason why this documentation has to be elaborated. If it is a difficult assessment, then it is important to consult between the TC and working group leadership, and also with support of the CCMC project manager, ISO technical project manager if relevant, what is the way forward. And it is very often useful, especially for the parallel work developed with ISO, to organize a call to discuss it, so that allows to gather all the impacted persons together and to discuss the options and the consequences. The options in case the assessment is not resolved are as follows. There are 3 options, and the 4th one for the projects developed together with ISO. It is still possible to conclude that the draft should be submitted to a formal vote if it is concluded that assessment was in practice resolved, that the TC replies are correct and valid. And then, as I have mentioned, I'm sorry, it is in very exceptional cases also possible to ask for a publication assessment, especially to assess Annex ZA, but this can be done only after the formal vote. Then, secondly, it can be decided to publish a non-harmonized standard. So, in other words, to remove the link to the EU legislation. For this, it is necessary to take a TC decision and then also to have a BT decision. Thirdly, it is also possible to decide that a given project will be cancelled for the time being. For this, we also need a TC decision and a BT decision. But of course, in the future, it is possible to achieve a harmonization via the new project. And then finally, this is very rare, of course, it's the least preferred option, but in theory, it is also, of course, it is possible to decide for CEN/TC to decouple from Vienna Agreement and to publish a homegrown harmonized standard. But attention, this standard will have then a different reference than the ISO document. And I would like to finish here and now give the floor to my colleague Constant Koller. Constant, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, for this extensive overview. I think it was very interesting. We had a few, well, many questions, in fact, but our colleagues Gonzalo and Nuno took the opportunity to reply already. So that's nice. Should other questions come in the meantime, please have a look at them in the background so we can reply as many questions as possible. But indeed, I'll hand the floor now to Constant.
Thank you very much, Else and Joanna, for this presentation. I will share my screen. I think it will be easier indeed to move on to the slide. And while I do that, yes, just a second. Yes, while I do that, I will present myself. So indeed, My name is Constant. I work as an account manager in CENELEC and especially in the electrotechnology department. So my main task is about dealing CENELEC standards, harmonized standards, and especially those that are in parallel with IEC, because you know that in the CENELEC portfolio, it's mainly about ENIC standard developed in parallel. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay, excellent. So indeed, just to complement your presentation with the perspective when it comes to a lack of compliance at formal vote assessment, where we are in the case of ENIC standard. So basically, there are different rules that can be taken in that respect. So if you get a formal vote assessment that is not compliant, either it requires some update in the text of the ENIC standard, and as you know, we will be in parallel with IEC, so it will not be possible to modify the IEC text because the IEC will publish the standard. So unless we start to develop what we call European common modification in Europe, the text as such of the ENIC standard cannot be modified. Therefore, the EN will not be offered, and the technical committee will have to consider the possibility either to start common modification to address specific European comment and input, or basically to wait for the next amendment or revision at IEC level to take the opportunity of this next cycle to address the remaining compliance issues. But if you get a negative formal vote assessment, which requires only some updates on the Annex ZZ or the Annex ZA, this is something that can be done after the formal vote, and for which we could request a publication assessment to have formally a compliant assessment in that respect, which means that the EN will be offered. But if the assessment is still not compliant at the publication stage, of course, we will have to organize in normal circumstances some kind of interaction with the Haas consultant to try to find a solution and to go into the direction of offering the European standard. So when we are in the case of ENIC, it's always very important to know that we work always with IEC lead, that we have to catch the train of the IEC, because IEC will not wait for Europe to resolve compliance-related issues. So it's very important in that context, the role of the national committees and the European experts who are in the EIC technical committee. So basically that concludes this second part, and thank you again, Joanna. And now I would like to provide a global overview, let's say, on the elaboration of harmonized standard. As you can imagine, there are a lot of differences between CEN, CENELEC, whether we are in parallel with ISO and IEC, whether we develop what we call homegrown standards. So I will try to be as consistent as possible, not going too much into the details, but for those details, rather to point you towards the existing document, which can hopefully give you the different answers that you need. But of course, as always, you can count on your CMC project manager to support you, to assist you in this mission. And because you know that harmonized standards indeed are the priorities of CEN, CENELEC, so it's very important that we work closely together on this. So I will start by the development process, and basically the message is that harmonized standards are developed in the same way as any other European standard in CEN, CENELEC, but with some, of course, some additional consideration. This is something that was already mentioned. The need, especially, to include an Annex Z, which provides a correlation between the essential requirement of a directive and the clauses that address those essential requirements. This is something that is absolutely critical for the citation of the standard. Of course, in CENELEC, we have the Annex ZA in CENELEC, which deals not with the essential requirement, but with the normative references, which makes this correspondence between the international standard and their adoption at the European level. And it is the opportunity basically to date the standards through this Annex ZA, so giving a legal certainty in that respect in the frame of the request of the European Commission to have a legal certainty with a harmonized standard. Of course, the role of the consultant, so that was already mentioned. This is also something that is critical and for which we are facing some shortcomings those days. But hopefully this is something that will be resolved in the coming weeks, in the coming month as well. It's very important to note that indeed the consultant, they work on behalf of the European Commission. They are not there to challenge any technical decision made by the technical committee, but rather to provide input to reach compliance. And I will go further into that later on in this presentation. So basically here you can get an overview of the process, very simplistic view, I would say. But on one hand, the core focus is about the development of the standards in CEN, in CENELEC, or with ISO or IC leads, the development of specific European annexes which I just mentioned. Of course, the Haas assessment is something very crucial in the process as well, to see where the project stands. And indeed, I would agree with some comments that were provided that the earlier we start with assessment, with getting feedback on possible compliance issue, the better it will be to reach compliance at the end, and the better it will be with offering the standard for assessment. But again, as it was mentioned, we do have some shortcomings in that respect, which hopefully will be resolved soon. Then, of course, there's this important step of offering the standard to the European Commission. So this is something that relates to CCMC. Every quarter, we have to review those standards that have received a compliant assessment, or those that are also borderline, I would say, to make our own assessment of the situation, and to offer those standards for which we are pretty sure that can be cited in the official journal. And of course, the European Commission is responsible for taking the final decision on citing the standards. As you know, the Haas consultant work on behalf of the European Commission. They are there to provide the assessment, to analyze the situation, but at the end, the decision to cite the standard, it's purely within the hand of the different European Commission services, the different European Commission officers. They rely on the assessment made by the Haas consultants, but it's important to note that it's their own decision. And then hopefully the standard is cited, and you can enjoy all the consequences of having the standard cited in the OJEU. Here, just to mention the international dimension. So here it's CEN ISO, but it's AC, because here the idea is really that we work in parallel, and that it does not change anything in terms of assessment steps, assessment request steps, and also the element that need to be provided in that respect. So this is why it's very important for the European Technical Committee to ensure close link with the international technical committees. There are different channels between CEN or CENELEC for that, but the objective is the same, to have a close contact with the International Technical Committee, to be able to anticipate as much as possible on the future step, so that as a European Technical Committee, you can deliver to us those elements that are needed, so that we can, for instance, request an assessment on time, and ensure all the different dialogues that will be needed as part of this process. So the assessment and the interaction as first working draft before the inquiry and before the formal vote, and this is all, and the relation with the Haas Contractor, the European Commission. And also it's important to note that in this period where the Haas consultants are not as available as we would like it to be, it's important to correspond with your CCMC project manager, because in different instances, we may have the opportunity to also contact directly the relevant desk officer in charge of a particular directive to solve this issue. So you see, it's a teamwork between different parties, basically. Normative references, also to recap on this, because this has become more and more a critical aspect of the work for the successful citation of the standard. For instance, in CENELEC, we used to very much to focus on the Annex ZZ, about this relation between the essential requirement and the clauses, but now we can notice that the Annex ZA in CENELEC about the normative references is becoming as important as the Annex ZZ. But it's the same for CEN. We don't have any Annex ZA for normative references CEN, but the principle remain the same. And basically, the principles, they rely on the CENELEC internal regulation part 3, basically, where it is notably mentioned that the normative references should be dated, active, and published. And this is also something that relates to the Vademecum part 3, that has been made available by the European Commission, and which also provides some additional guidance on the use of normative references. Also, a normative reference to a standard that has not been cited in the OJEU is possible unless the standard has been rejected by the European Commission. So, it's very important to note that when you have a standard, there are a lot of different normative references which form an integral part of the standard. So it's important to have a holistic view on it. And if a given standard provides a normative references to a standard which provide requirements that are considered as problematic by the European Commission, of course, this is something that the citation will be something difficult to achieve in that respect. But of course, there are multiple configurations that can be handled in that respect. For instance, a rejected standard, only some clauses in the standard are problematic. So the new standard can refer to some clauses that are not problematic. So it's very important to pay attention to this issue of normative references, because it's very critical. And of course, you may have noticed some webinars that CCMC has organized for different sectors. And in each of them, there are specific sections dedicated to normative references where we can find our relevant details. So this is what I mentioned. We refer basically on the CENELEC internal regulation part 3 to the need to refer to European standard from CENELEC 8C, but also to ISO IC document. It's possible to refer to different standards from different organizations under specific provision as well. And here you have for instance, the link on the webinar for Harmonized standard under the Machinery Directive, where there is an extensive part about normative references. In terms of the content of the standard, basically, when we work on the European standard, which is only European, or on the international standard, EN-ISO or EN-IC standard, I can hear that sometimes experts are disappointed because they receive a negative assessment, and which could make them believe that that the standard is not considered as good, as being good enough, basically. And here I would like to mention that it's not because you receive a negative assessment that it will mean that you have not done a good job, but it's or that the standard is not good enough. It is simply that this does not fulfill some legal requirement for having the status of a harmonized standard cited in the OJEU. So here I just want you to provide you with a brief overview of those main items for which the European Commission is paying a particular look at, and notably in terms of concise and clear scope. The scope has to mention what are those products that are covered, the risks that are covered, and also those products or risks that are not covered, so that the user of the standard can have a clear overview if a given product is included or not. And this is a requirement from the European Commission, but again, this is something that you can find as a requirement in the CENELEC internal regulation part 3, which are, by the way, similar to the ISO IC directive. So there should be nothing new for you in that respect. Of course, again, in the frame of the internal regulation and the ISO IC directive, there's a clear need to have objectively verifiable requirement and test method. In that respect, it has to be as clear as possible, and that's a very strong requirement. The normative references, which as mentioned, but also the neutrality principle. For instance, the standard shall not contain clauses imposing requirement or obligation on or between certain economic operators. This is also something crucial to get a compliant assessment. Of course, we do have the Annex ZA, the Annex ZZ, and also the compliance with sector-specific rules. So here I would like to invite you to check the relevant webinars that are available on the CENELEC website. You may know that also some specific checklists are made available by the European Commission for specific directive. So it's always very important to follow those checklists, those webinars. Of course, we don't want to overload you with too many information, but it's essential to be aware of those different aspects. So here it's all about complying indeed. I would like to mention the checklist for harmonized European standard and the main principle. This is something that relates to a decision that has been made by the the BTs recently, and which requires the use of this checklist for those standards that have been developed in Europe, so with CEN or CENELEC lead. And basically, when drafting a homegrown harmonized standard, so yeah, as I mentioned, under the Vienna Agreement or as a CENELEC homegrown standard or with common modification, the technical bodies shall check the compliance of the standard against a dedicated checklist, which lists the different aspects which will be critical for the assessment. And it's about ensuring that it's filled out and sent to CCMC when the draft and goes through the specific standardization procedures. Actually, it's not a tool that we want to use at CCMC to reject standard. Basically, that's not the purpose. It's rather for raising awareness on those key points that are crucial for reaching compliance of the standard. And by rejecting the draft because the checklist will not be made available, again, it's not a message of saying that the standard is not good enough. It's an incentive for paying duly attention to this checklist, because we believe it could be a key instrument, a key tool to increase the compliance level of the standard. And those are, of course, available on the CEN and CENELEC both. And of course, you can imagine also when we are in a configuration where it is ISO or IEC lead, the train runs at international level. So the idea is not to block the development of standards at international level because of the specific European specificities and compliance-related issue, but still, when you are in a configuration, in the international configuration with ISO and IEC lead, it's very important to get inspired by this checklist, because if you fulfill those different dimensions, would be a good presumption that the standard could be compliant. So that's the process for the checklist. Maybe I will not go too much into the details, but rather to point you towards the CEN matrix of responsibilities, which will provide you a clear overview of who is doing what between the TC secretary, the conveners, the chair, between CCMC, the European Commission, the Haas consultant, because as I mentioned, it's clearly a teamwork. So it's important to be as clear as possible on who is doing what. Similarly, it's the same for here. It is mentioned that the matrix of responsibility is still under discussion, but I think that you may have heard this morning that actually this matrix has been approved by the CENELEC BT a couple of weeks ago. It is now available on the CENELEC boss, and again, it gives an overview of the role and responsibility of all those involved in this harmonization process. And then to conclude my part, I would like to go through the citation of the harmonized standard themselves. I don't want to take too long on that again, but just to recap the principle that you, the technical committee, you develop the standard, you have those steps, and at the end, CCMC offer the standard for citation. And of course, as I mentioned, is the decision of the European Commission to cite or to reject the standard thanks to a final EC European Commission assessment. And this is what is highlighted there. This is the step I would like to talk about. So once the standards are made available by CEN or by CENELEC, this is the DAV, the date of availability of the standard. After this date of availability, we every quarter, basically, CCMC offers standards to the European Commission in March, April, July for Q3 and Q4 as well, every quarter, basically. So that's why it's a particular job for us, and it's a critical one, the most critical one actually, because we identify those new references, we validate them, we create lists that we offer to European Commission. We also provide some pre-notification so that the European Commission can also anticipate on their side of what is coming up. So it's really the date of availability that is crucial, because if the standard has not been made available, we cannot offer it for citation, and we would have to offer it for the next quarter, which of course will not be ideal for you in terms of standard users. Sorry. So it's also about a formal exchange between CCMC between CENELEC and the European Commission in that respect, in terms of offering the new reference every quarter. And the European Commission is supposed to have a 10 weeks deadline actually to provide feedbacks, and the possible outcomes is the acceptance, so the citation of the standard, or the rejection, for which we would receive a letter. CENELEC will receive a letter from the European Commission explaining why the standard has been rejected. And of course, we want to reduce as much as possible the number of rejection in that respect, as you may understand. Now, also important to note that the standards are cited in the L series of the official journal. Before it was in the C series, so the communication, now it's L for legal, and which stress the fact basically that in some way harmonized standards are part of the EU legal system, whether we like it or not. It's a fact, because when the standard is cited, it produces some specific legal effect, as you may be all aware. So this is an example for the Low Voltage Directive, or it looks like, and now, at least as far as CENELEC is concerned, the European Commission makes available Excel sheets, which makes available consolidated version of what is available, what is cited, what is not cited anymore, which is also a helpful guidance for the different experts. That's for toys, for example. This is an example of rejection, so the letter that I mentioned with the reason for rejection. And also, this is one of the final points I would like to address, because it can lead sometimes to confusions to those that are not used to the official journal, is the date of withdrawal, and actually which must be understood as the date of withdrawal of the standard, which will stop to provide presumption of conformity. Because here you can see on the screen, for instance, the standard or the amendment has been made available on 2008, and basically in September 2020, the effects related to the presumption of conformity stopped. And this is very important to note that this date of withdrawal relates to a decision that is made by the European Commission. This is not something that relates to the date of withdrawal, the DOW in CEN or in CENELEC. Those are two different tools, two different instruments. Of course, our approach is to invite the European Commission to align those two dates to give basically also, again, legal certainty to the standard users. But in practice, the date of withdrawal in the official journal is shorter than the DOW, especially in CENELEC, because in CENELEC it's 36 months. So yeah, this date of withdrawal is not equal to the DOW, and of course, if there's a need to extend the date of withdrawal in the official journal, there's always the possibility to engage with the relevant desk officers to provide some facts, some data on the reason why this date should be extended. So this is always something is possible, because the European Commission intends to use 18-month transition period as the default period for the transition between different versions of the standard. And that's it on my side. I hope I did not take too much time, and I hope it was comprehensive enough. Please have a look to the CEN and CENELEC both. We have spent specific effort to provide tailored guidance on all those different aspects. And of course, never hesitate to reach your CENELEC project manager to respond to any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Constant, for this presentation. A few questions came in while you were speaking, but our colleagues took care of the answers. There's only one. I see that Joanna is tempting or would like to request to answer the question live. Joanna, are you still there? It's about a new challenge for TCs in relation to multi-part standards that the Commission asks now for all standards to be published simultaneously.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ali, for being with us, and thank you for the question.